Greetings from a surprisingly illuminated continent this day, seeing as the sun is still high in the air. Usually at this time at 7 p.m. at night during the winter, the sun is already down, but I'm pleasantly surprised to see there's still a lot of daylight outside. So that's a welcome sign of summer that's on the on the horizon, I guess. Today I'm talking to a very interesting guest that is a, let me just check his profile here to give you a better idea of who he is. So he is a columnist for the Rational Standard, and he's also written for BusinessDay. He is a former libertarian and former socialist with an interest in, among other things, black consciousness, free markets, and anarchism. And I would just like to welcome my guest, Mr. Dhlamini. Welcome to the show, man.
Thank you, man. Thank you. Just so one thing, the former libertarian bit was just to distinguish myself from the minarchists, but of course I'm a libertarian.
Oh yeah, man. No, it's I think you've had a debate with Nicholas Wood from the Rational Standard about the definition of an anarchist and a libertarian, and he says he seems to have changed your mind.
Yes.
So, is there anything I left out in my description? So, where do you fall on the political compass or the political spectrum?
Yeah, I'm just you can call me an NCAP. So that's just simply what it is. I believe in property rights, but I also believe that you don't need government to have a system of property rights to have to enforce contracts between free individuals. So I'm just an NCAP, man.
Yo, man, that's a rare breed in South Africa. It's an ideology that only seems to have really come in at a later stage with the age of the internet. Now, you've written for Rational Standard and the BusinessDay, and one of the interesting articles that I saw you wrote was on Ernst's Parliament speech.
Yes.
And what I saw there, what I found very interesting is you said that you agree with a lot of the points that he made, and then also you said, and I'm quoting from your article now, the ANC government could have simply bought up the 5% of land available in the market and given it to black people. And if this had happened since 1994, as Mr. Roets said, more than half of the farms in the country would have been in the hands of black people by now. So if black ownership of land was their overarching concern, this should have been their points of focus.
Yeah,
so now, yeah, so on that point, I'd just like you to elaborate on your stance towards land expropriation for the people listening.
Well, land expropriation is a very bad idea, not apart from the economic emitters that are going to be affected negatively. It's also a bad idea just because it's affecting property rights. It's unjust, it's stealing from people. So expropriation, I don't like all expropriation, but this is particularly bad, not compensating people for their property. So that's my stance. And as for land reform,
you seem to have cut out there, man.
As for land reform, I don't really see. For me, it's what would be the justification for such a process of reforming land ownership? That's what I want to understand first before I can decide if I support or I don't support it.
Right. Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. But at the same time, you were one of the few voices with the Rational Standard that actually came out in support of Ernst after that speech. You also mentioned it in one of your articles, the idea that the DA MP said that she didn't agree with anything that he said, which I found very surprising, which means actually by implication that she agrees with EWC. And that's something an idea that I want to see more in South Africa, where people like NGOs, for example, and the civil society comes up and against and challenges land reform, or not land reform, the expropriation without compensation. I think it was Ernst that said that he is in support of land reform or restitution, rather, if it is historically based and fair. And I couldn't agree more. If you can prove that there was unfairness or unjust land taken from you in the past, I think we should, within the bounds of the Constitution, that should be rectified. But if you just go the Zimbabwe route with land expropriation without compensation, which we've seen now seems to be more of a political tool than a tool of justice, I think we're going down a very dangerous path.
Well, of course, I agree with you. And that's as much as Ernst believes in restitution, I also believe in restitution because obviously it's a no-brainer. It's reporting, it's restoring property rights to people who had theirs taken away. So that's a no-brainer for me.
Yeah.
So, but when it comes to land reform, I'm not sure if I support it per se, but I definitely support restitution. But I don't like what would be the purpose of reforming land ownership? That's what no one seems to be able to answer. Because if you look at the record of such a things, it's pretty clear that South Africans, Black South Africans in particular, don't want to own rural land, in especially, but it's like they want to be part of the urban economy. So. From where I'm sitting, and it's not restoring anyone's property rights. It's just saying, oh, land ownership is skewed by some arbitrary metric, and then we have to fix that for some unknown reason. So it's not solving any existing problem.
Right, and as we've seen, there seems to be I've done quite a lot of research into this because it interests me a lot, the idea of land reform in South Africa and how it is used as a political tool. It does seem to be a sub-Saharan African phenomenon where land is almost the last-ditch effort of a government that's losing power to try and regain some of its authority or sovereignty, or just scrape together some power. It's almost as if you look at the patterns across the region, you see that it's almost an indication of a government that's losing its grip on its populace.
But I would say it's a sub-Saharan African phenomenon in the modern era, because if you look at past socialist revolutions in Europe and especially, so you will see that they always go after the land. They always go after the people who have land versus the people who don't have land. So it's always it's an old story. So they always target the particular manifestation of property, which is land, and go after that as a manifestation of the class inequalities in society. So they always want to take over that. So, but we know in sub-Saharan Africa in particular, we have the benefit because we've seen what's happened in Europe, in Asia, in South America, and in other African countries. Now now that we're in South Africa, and we see what happens when these people try to address what they call the class imbalances, and then the negative consequences that ensure. So I don't know why we would want to do something like that, having seen it go so badly wrong in other places.
And something I also found interesting, and you pointed this out in your article as well, is the nerve that Ernst Roets touched on in Parliament, which is the idea of this hidden agenda that the ANC just so desperately just wants everyone's attention to be diverted from. And I think Ernst Roets definitely hit a nerve there, and just judging by the reaction, it seems to be a very raw nerve.
What most people don't understand is that whatever compromise or temporary ceasefire you can get with the ANC, for them it's never permanent. Like if you can sign, let's say you sign a peace treaty with them in 1994, which the terms of which get written down as our constitution, but for them it was never permanent. They were always pursuing the socialist revolution through the NDR. So it's just whoever person in question is, whether it's Thabo Mbeki, it's Nelson Mandela, it's whoever, the ANC is committed a process that is driven CP, but it's unless they repudiate the NDR somehow through one of their conferences, then they are committed to it, and it's an ongoing thing. So people need to understand that the ANC is really driving towards a socialist revolution, but they will retreat when they need to. They will step back. They will compromise from time to time. But if the circumstances allow, they will go as far as the circumstances allow. Just to give you one example, now since 2004, I think we've had mineral rights being under the control of the states. So they are the ones who dish out mineral rights. So in other ways, we've already lost. Even if you own a piece of land with, let's say, gold under it, though that gold doesn't belong to you, you have to apply for a license from the states. So we've already lost the critical component, a critical part of our property rights. So they just keep driving on towards this, but it's an incremental thing, and that's what most people are aside, or that's how they lose. Most people, that's how they lose in South Africa, because they can't keep track of what the ANC is doing. They don't know that there's an overarching grand strategy that they are following.
I think it was Jordan Peterson that made the point that tyranny creeps ahead, and like one little inch at a time. So they'll take away a little bit of your rights. You'll start only until you start protesting, and then they stop and they wait until you calm down. And then they inch away or chip away a bit more of your rights. And then when you start making a noise, they stop and they wait. And then before you know it, you're miles away from where you were, but you didn't even take a single step just because they were pushing you a little bit. And I think that's something South Africans need to wake up to, is the idea of that government tyranny. You don't just wake up to government tyranny. It's something that happens over a very long period of time, because the totalitarians or the authoritarians are playing the long game.
Yes. So that's why I've decided to just stand where I am. I don't want to yield any more ground. So for me, it's not just EWC. It's also fighting against everything else at the same time, and just not yielding any ground. Because the tendency that South Africans have, especially liberals, they say, is to compromise, trade away something. Let's say they say, okay, no, you can expropriate through the constitution. So you introduce that into jurisprudence, that judges can allow expropriation without compensation using the constitution. And then, but in return, you mustn't change the constitution. So the ANC says yes, but now you've lost something important, even though nothing has written in the constitution, except it's accepted jurisprudence that they land without paying compensation, which should never, ever be accepted.
Yeah. And I think just as exactly what you said, that theory can be applied, I think, in the best way to the idea of censorship. The idea of as soon as you start saying that you can't, certain types of words you can't say, or certain types of offensive things you can't say because it will hurt someone's feelings. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Now, I don't want to use the fallacy or the classic arguments of a slippery slope, but I think when it comes to authoritarianism and especially censorship, there's definitely, if you look at history, there's a pattern of a slippery slope. Always starts as something small.
Yeah, no, it's definitely something that's really something that's happening in South Africa. Like, you know, it's the sheer volume of what the ANC has thrown at us. Like, it's staggering, and it's so hard to keep track of it all, especially if you're our media and your business model basically is short-termism and providing people with clickbait. So you can't keep track of this grand strategy or narrative that's happening. So it's something we need to be aware of. But there are people who are aware, like people like me and you, but also more important, Franz Kronia from the South African Institute of Race Relations. He's basically got the ANC's number, and also Ernst Roets of AfriForum. So people like that, we need to join with and fight against all these bad things.
Yeah, and on that note, I'd like to move into the topic of just the idea of NGOs, and you've also touched on this in multiple of your articles, the idea of how important civil society is and how people should start doing things for themselves. I'm just going to look for that quote where you said, so you should vote for change, but also practice the idea of doing things yourself, working and replacing government services like welfare through voluntary means. And that's exactly what AfriForum are doing when they're fixing potholes, or when they are helping black farmers against land invasions, or anything like that. They're doing what the government is failing to do. So just from what I've read, and maybe just to get some confirmation from you for the audience, you are in full support of what AfriForum do in that regard.
Yeah, in that regard. Yes, I am. But they also do other stuff like help communities fight crime. And you remember the famous case of that doctor in Pretoria who had squatters coming onto his land, and AfriForum supported him and got the squatters off. So it's I support their civil society activism 100%. Like it's what we need, and especially there's an interesting person called Pete Leroux. He's not. I don't think he's the CEO of what used to be called AfriSake. Now it's called Sachtellichte. So he's very big on arborism, which is basically how to put it, like to stuff that shouldn't be illegal, then supporting that as much as possible. So, for example, if you want to, I don't want to misrepresent anyone here, but let's say just talking about algorithm in general. If you want to buy drugs from me, I would support that, like to your right to do that, and help you protect yourself from the state even though it's not illegal, it's illegal according to the state, but we know that there's nothing wrong in principle with two people voluntarily exchanging something, and then the one person chooses to put it into their body. So like stuff like that. I'm also an agorist.
Yeah. And that's something I've mentioned on previous shows as well, is the idea of just because AfriForum are an Afrikaner-centered NGO doesn't mean that they should be the only one. They should be. I want to see more. I wouldn't mind if there was, for example, NGOs headed by Zulus or by Vendas or whatever group in South Africa. I want to see more of that, even if that NGO leans more towards one group than another. If they're doing a service to the country and they're doing services that the ANC or the government, whoever the government is, if they're filling a void, then I'm in full support of them, no matter where their loyalties lie.
Yes,
that's what I want to encourage. Yeah.
The mistake that we often make is applying the same the standards that we should be applying to government, applying to free individuals doing what best suits them. So there's nothing wrong with associating with people of your own culture. Like I, for example, want to do certain things with Zulus only. I wouldn't invite you. Like you sound like a nice guy, but I don't invite you to certain Zulu traditional things that we do among Zulus. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to associate with people of your own culture, your own language, and so it's wrong if government does it because they have the monopoly on force. But if it's free individuals exchanging, associating among themselves, there's nothing wrong with it in principle. And it doesn't mean they're bad people.
Yeah. You can just take an example of, like, let's say a Zulu-centered NGO sprouts up from grassroots and they say their stated mission is we're going to go to specifically Zulu-dominated communities and we're going to fix potholes there. I mean, I can't find a single reason why I would oppose it in any way or try to condemn them or speak illy of them. That's exactly what I want to see across South Africa. And no matter what your loyalty leanings are, I think.
Yes. So, the only time that never applies is when it comes to government, because they tax all of us. So they force all of us to give them money to fund them. And so all their services should be applied equally to all of us.
Right. And on that note, a bit of a controversial question, but it goes on to the idea of self-determination and also associating with your own group. What are your thoughts on the libertarian community of Urania? I saw you mention them in one of your articles.
I think as long as it's all voluntary and no one is being forced to do anything, I don't see anything wrong in principle with Urania. Like they may want, okay, this is what I would say. If they are racist, if let's say the leadership of Orania are racist, then I wouldn't want to associate with them personally. But then at the same time, it doesn't mean we should send the states after them, voluntarily interacting with each other. So the main thing here is always property rights. You don't want to degrade the property rights of individuals, like what they may be saying or how they may be saying it or what they may be doing because of that. So I don't mind the existence of Orania. I wouldn't want to apply force to them. Like I don't know enough about the people who run it to say whether it's racist or not. I've never met any of them, so I wouldn't go into that. But like it's in principle, what they're doing, the state shouldn't stop them from doing what they're doing.
Yeah.
And they are.
Actually, on that note, and I'd like to have your thoughts on this. This is an idea that I've had for a while. So I think that's the solution for South Africa, for a rainbow nation like ours, is that we are always going to have groups within all the cultures that don't want to be part of the rainbow nation idea, that just want to associate with their own people. So I think the solution for social tensions in South Africa would be to give these people an option. If you only want to associate with Zulu people, there should be an option for you where you can go live and you don't have to be part of the diverse Rainbow Nation project. You can go live amongst your own people, speak your own language. Your children go to the schools that are taught in your language, and you are out of everyone's way. You're not bothering anyone. You're not forcing your beliefs on anyone, but you can have your own little spot somewhere in South Africa where you can just be amongst your own people. I think that would actually do wonders for social tensions in South Africa, where it comes down to that question: what's worse, forced segregation or forced integration? And I think both of them have elements of malice to them. I don't think anyone should be forced to integrate. If you just want to be surrounded by your own people, you should have a place. There should be a place for those types of people. What are your thoughts on that sentiment?
I would want to take force out of everything. So forced integration and forced segregation to me are both equally evil. like let's free individuals decide if they want to segregate space. Like if you own a piece of land somewhere and you say, okay, this piece of, let's say a huge piece of land, like something like Ramaphosa would own, or some like very big billionaire guy. So if you own a piece of land, like, and then you say, okay, I'll only sell, I'll start a development here, residential development, and I'll only sell these plots to other Zulus or other Afrikaners. There's nothing wrong with that. But the way it gets bad is when you say, okay, this area is reserved for Zulus, and then it's the government saying that, and it's saying, okay, it's preventing people from selling property to each other or from buying property from each other because they don't fall into the right ethnic group or the race or whatever.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense to me. The idea of it all comes down to freedom, and that's why I named this episode of Stream of Consciousness "Choosing Freedom." The idea of I want people to have as much choice as possible in terms of determining their own destiny and determining their own destiny of not only themselves but also their family and friends. I think they should be able to create their own communities and should be able to have the room to be able to make as many free choices as possible. I think that's the way to prosperity, not more state micromanagement or the state having their thumbs in all your pies or in all your doings. Can't remember who it was, but there was this one comedian that said the end goal of the state will always be advertised as we are going to aim to have a policeman in every home to make sure that there's no evil doings behind closed doors. And that's how that's authoritarianism. That's where it goes. That's my philosophy as well when it comes to lifestyles. The idea of I don't really care what you do behind closed doors. If it doesn't affect me, you can do whatever you want. I'm not going to make my morality a constitution for the world.
Yeah, I don't even care what Malusi Kikaba does behind closed doors.
Interesting story that I'm not going to go too much into it, but just an observation on it is it's an excellent distraction from much more serious things.
Yes.
I think I can't remember where I saw a cartoon today of like this dog who's biting on a bone that's like state capture, and then someone just throws a ball called sex tape, and he just stops chewing on the bone and just goes after the ball. And I think that's what's happening in South Africa at the moment with that whole scandal. Because I want people to be less distracted by something as superficial as that and look at the real issues.
Yeah, but distracted is a choice. Mine to never articulate can be more easily explained through stupidity. So there's an element of that, but it's our choice to get distracted. Like I always say I can walk and chew gum, so I can think about, I can hold more than 2 thoughts in my head. I'm not a dog. I don't have one focus of attention. I can focus on multiple things at one time, and so it's our choice as people. If you are being easily distracted by stuff like that, then there's something wrong with you. You should fix that.
And especially now in the age of social media, I mean, there's distractions galore. I think it's actually doing a lot of good in terms of connecting ideas and in terms of sharing ideas and critiquing ideas, but it's also doing a lot of social ill in terms of just distracting people from the things that really matter. People are likes they get on the net. Google the Library of Alexandria on steroids at your fingertips, where you can read any book you want. You can watch a video on any topic you want, even if it's a taboo topic, you can find it somewhere. And that's actually something that I support fully. I think people should be able to read any book they want. They should be able to read what they like. I think suppression of any type of work only gives it legitimacy. When people try to censor certain radicals, for example, let's say they say, if you identify as a Nazi, you shouldn't be able to talk in public. Now, that's exactly the opposite of what I would do. If someone's wrong, I give them a microphone so other people can hear why they're wrong as well.
Yes.
And the last time they took a person that had some pretty taboo ideas and they threw him in jail, he wrote a book called Mein Kampf, and you will know where that went. So I'm not in the camp of trying to censor or suppress any type of idea. I think you should be able to engage that idea in any type of context.
Yes, I know. I totally agree with you. I would like to have a US style freedom of speech here. I think the US has got it right when it comes to stuff like this. They allow everything else. They allow everyone to have their say. So that's what we need here.
Yeah, in terms of like a First Amendment, I think would be
Yes.
incredible for South Africa. Like I said, sunlight is the best disinfectant.
Yes.
I don't want to drive the radicals underground because then they can just sit in their own little echo chamber and reinforce each other's ideas without having their ideas challenged.
Yeah.
That's the absolute worst thing we could do. That's why I, in a sense, appreciate that the EFF exists, because at least I can know those radical elements are in the public eye. I don't want them to be banned from public spaces. And I think you also you touched on this in one of your columns as well, the idea of the biggest mistake the apartheid government made was exiling the ANC, giving them that legitimacy and having black South Africans be able to unite and set aside their differences for a greater cause. And I think, yeah, it touches back on that fact of it's not going to help exiling ideas you don't agree with. That's only going to give them more legitimacy.
Yeah, no, they sowed the seeds of their own destruction through how they reacted to the ANC and other parties like the PAC and the SACP. So if they just said, okay, these guys want to say this, we'll allow them to say whatever they say, we'll give them representation or whatever if they can get the votes, and just talk to them. And then eventually people would have I would think people would have rejected the offering of the SACP in particular. They would have, the party like the DP, I think, could have made a lot of inroads. So but you never know. We can't know now because of the history is what it is. So
yeah, hindsight is amazing. You can always look back and you can be a smart ass and say, "Oh, if only they did this and this." And like, oh man, do you realize you're in the present right now, and in a few years you're going to look back on yourself and wish, "Oh, if I just did this." And that's the thing. People, hindsight is an incredible thing.
Just on what we're talking about now about books. Like, I think now we are in an era where education has become completely free, and this is the first time in history we are living in such an age. So it is the means of becoming as wealthy as you want to be, or it's within your fingertips. You can choose to spend your time on social media, or you can choose to read books or videos, or learn how to be a productive person and make money and teach yourself something new and create wealth for people and create value for other people and become wealthy. So it's for the first time in history, like, people don't understand how revolutionary the time we're living in is. Like, we have access to so much information, and it's up to us to choose if you want to construct a university level degree for yourself online for free, you can do that. There's nothing stopping you.
And I think this is the I think we're witnessing a what do you call a watershed moment where we're seeing the end of public education. We're seeing the masses educate themselves. And on that note, on this idea of you being able to read what you like, I'd like you to just elaborate a bit more. I see you've written 2 articles now on Black consciousness. Now, this is a very tainted term in the modern in linguistic terms. There's a lot of negative and positive connotations to it because it's such a nuanced term. Could you just, I'm going to give you the floor completely to just give us a nice compact idea of what you think Black consciousness is and what are the risks and the benefits of it.
Okay, so Black consciousness, from what I understand from reading some of what Biko has said and has written on the topic, is basically having that awareness of yourself, particularly as a black person. And I think it was meant to address a specific problem among the Black community, something I would like to call the inferiority complex. So if you look at the bad ideas that are hanging around, like look at someone like Andile Mzama, for example. There was a time where he was relating a story about he was living in a farm, and he was abused by these white people or something, and he was that's radicalized him and made him. That's, for me, is classic inferiority complex. It's someone looking up, deciding to look down upon themselves, and then deciding to use violence against other people. So whereas seriousness, it was meant to address that problem, not to reinforce it. But today what's happening is it's being used to reinforce rather than address the problem. So what we need rather is to be saying to people, okay, you are okay as a human being. You are just as able as everyone else, if you are Black or whatever. Like there have been great Black civilization in the past in Africa or whatever. So it doesn't matter if you not that it doesn't matter, but you can't be as good as anyone else, as good as anyone else. And
we were okay. Yeah, so we were discussing the difference between Bikoism and Black consciousness. So if you can just give that again from the start, then we can go.
So you have Black consciousness on one end, which was meant to address the specific issues faced by Black people and make a Black person basically conscious and dealing with stuff like stuff like the inferiority complex, making them aware of their own history, the great things done in the past by other Black people, some of the negative things, and just making them aware that they are parts of the human story. And then you have Bikoism, which includes a lot of other socialist nonsense stuff from Fanon and all of that, which is more about using violence to solve some of these problems, which is what I disagree with. So I make that distinction because I thought that Biko, some of what Biko had said was very important even for today. I think it can still be applied to help to solve some of the problems we still face. And I think a lot of people just take on Bikoism and ignore Black consciousness.
All right. Yeah. No, your internet seems to be completely fixed now, man.
Yeah.
So then, just on that same topic, I do see, and this is what I brought up when I say that Black consciousness has almost become a tainted term. It seems to be a very a big slang term within the BLF and the EFF movement as well. So that's when, in that sense, is that the more destructive side that you are referencing, the idea of where you justify violence through it?
Well, people like the BLF and the EFF believe in taking everything a thinker says and taking it as gospel, or they worship a thinker religiously, someone like Steve Biko. I'd rather take something that will help me and reject the stuff that will be destructive in my life. So I think that's the problem. That's why the problem is. These are people who may have good intentions, who knows, but they have chosen to accept everything because we should never do that about any thinker, about any person. You should always be critical about the ideas that come into your mind and that you take on board.
And it's interesting that you mentioned this inferiority complex, because this is something I've brought up quite a few times as well. This idea of, there seems to be, if you could take all the Black South Africans, you condense them into one individual, and that individual goes to for a psychological examination, the psychologist would tell them that they definitely suffer from an inferiority complex, the idea of not believing that they can reason individually, think individually, or even act individually.
Yes.
A lot of that is manifested in the idea of when people are shamed, and I think you also mentioned that in one of your articles, all these slurs that you have for Black people that think for themselves, or in a more crude sense, those that wander off the progressive reservation. Exactly. The idea of, as soon as there's one Black person that doesn't go with the stream or goes against the grain, they are instantly shamed. And I don't think we see that anywhere else more prominently than in the United States.
Yes, and I think it's when Biko invented Black consciousness for South Africa, it was around the same time when Malcolm X had already done the same for the USA. So people like Malcolm X and Biko said some of the same things, and they identified the same problem, and both of them were very concerned about solving this problem. And to my mind, it seems like a lot of thinkers misunderstand what these people were about and what they wanted to bring about to solve this particular problem. And it's a problem solved a lot of history and were not exposed to it. Not that someone was trying to bury it, but we were not exposed to it. A lot of people have done good work and covered that history, but we were just not exposed to it. We didn't know about the great civilizations of the past, like the great Zimbabwe and in Zimbabwe and some of these other places. So we need to know that we are very much part of the human story as a Black person. You are as capable as anyone else, and you don't need to this retreat to the group. They always need to feel the need to club together with other people and act against and use violence against every other group. You can club with the group if it's to your benefit, if it benefits you as an individual, but you don't need to do it for the sake of because no, we need Black because I'm scared of being by myself. I'm scared of thinking for myself. I'm scared that I won't be good enough.
Yeah, no, definitely.
And if I'm by my own, so that's what I want to speak again. Yeah,
and
so that was motivation.
Yeah.
I was saying that was my motivation in writing the articles, just to shine a light on what I consider to be the more important parts of Black consciousness, or of what I consider to be Black consciousness, and try and reject the negativity of the entirety of egoism, and just focus on Black consciousness, something that we still need even today, something that we should be teaching in schools, something that should become a national philosophy in a similar way, but not quite the Chinese have Confucius. So
Yes.
Biko could be sort of our Confucius here in South Africa or even in other African countries. But we need to identify what is good about him and accept that and reject what is bad about him.
And that's interesting that you brought that up, because the whole idea of the inferiority complex also links to a very touchy topic, which is Black economic empowerment and quotas in sport. So now the question that I have is, don't you think that is quite damaging to the well, it actually perpetuates the inferiority complex when you tell people that you can't compete on a level playing field, you need special help from the government to be able to compete.
I agree with you 100%. No self-respecting Black person should ever accept a quota position or a B or take on BE shares or whatever. You should know that you don't need the force of the state to compel other people to give you something that you could get from your skills, get through your competence, through your own endeavors. So I don't understand how people who claim to be fighting for the emancipation of Black people would accept something like that.
Yeah, it's actually quite patronizing, and I don't want to bring up again a very like cliche point. This is something that a lot of more of the boomers and the neocons used to say, is like the idea of the Democrats in America are the actual racists, or the leftists are the actual racists. But it's just from my own personal perspective. From what I've seen from the left, is that they treat Black people paternalistically. The idea of in terms of speech, in terms of they can't handle certain words or can't handle certain offensive things. And when it comes to the employment sector, it's also like they can't compete with white people. They need extra help. And I just as me as a minarchist, and a quasi-libertarian to an extent, can't accept that. I wouldn't talk to my friends like that. Why would I talk to anyone else then? Exactly. That's always a test I do with people, is when they paternalize someone or they coddle someone, is I ask them, would you do this to your best friend? Would you not be? I mean, a good friend will be honest with you and tell you, no, you don't need to be able. You shouldn't be offended at everything, or you shouldn't have the state have you as a quota in a workplace. A good friend would tell you, no, you are worth it as an individual. You don't need any type of protection. And that's where censorship also comes in. The idea of, I don't think, and this might be a controversial point to a lot of people, is I think something that would be very beneficial to Black people across the world is if they can get to that point where words can't hurt you anymore, where you can get them to that mindset of self-respect, where you can tell them anything. You can tell them, or you can say the most egregious racist statement towards them. They know in their hearts it's not true. So that shouldn't be something that debilitates them, or something that they could be offended by. That's fine. But they shouldn't then demand that the state reprimand this racist, or that this racist should be thrown in jail. I think that actually perpetuates that feeling of inferiority. That's why I always tell people, in terms of, when people call me a racist or a far right white supremacist or whatever label, I say it doesn't matter. It's like water off a duck's back, because I know what I am. I don't need the state or any radical to tell me what I am. And I think that's the idea. Yeah.
The interesting thing about racists is that all of them are quite they're not the most intellectual bunch. So if you're offended by someone stupid, then what does that say about you?
Yeah. I think it was, I can't remember where, but there was a debate in one of these midterm debates where a Democrat versus a Republican, and then the Democrat candidate said something along the lines of, so a bunch of even the racists are calling you racist, Mr. Republican. And then the Republican replies, audience, do you see my opponent? When someone wants information, they usually go to experts, like someone that's has a doctorate in their field, or someone that's an expert in their field. As you can see, my opponent goes to racists to himself. And so yeah, it's that idea of you shouldn't have to be just so sensitive to the world. And this is advice I can give to anyone, no matter their creed or color. I think people just need to grow a thicker skin when it comes to words. I think the most liberating thing for me was the day I realized that as long as you know what you are, then nobody can tell you what you are. Then you are.
And the most disappointing thing for me was seeing some classical liberals buy into this idea that we must get black people to be represented in our institutions, in our political parties, where you had basically Karen Zille introducing a quota system in the DA in order to allow more black people to become leaders. That was disappointing for me because she had been buying into something that the DA had been fighting for a long time. And so I always call out even my side on this, that you mustn't just get black people just because you want to avoid attacks from the other side that you are racist. Get black people who actually know what they're talking about, to who can do the job that you want them to do and whatever. Don't get them for the sake of being black. Get people because they are competent.
And something I find interesting just from studying what you've written so far in columns, there seems to be, for me, an overarching connection between not only your stance on black consciousness, but also your stance on anarchism. I would almost say, I would almost call you a black anarchist if you combine those two terms, where you have black people that, as you describe anarchy as taking your fate into your own hands.
Yes,
you can combine the two ideologies.
I agree with you, and I'm glad you noticed that, because that's something I am trying to bring about, because I think there is a connection there. If you can liberate black people from the thinking that they need someone else, they need a big money to take care of them, then they will be able to be self-reliant, to do things for themselves, to start their own civil society organizations. I mean, just to give you one example, something as simple as there's always these complaints that black people can't access finance if they want to start businesses from the banks. Why don't we start our own banks? Why don't we put the money that we save every month to stokvels or whatever and use that as a finance institution that can fund black people's businesses? Why do we need the state to start a bank for us? Are we that useless? Can't we figure out that we can just save the money that we already have, that we use every month, that we save, some of us, and then just put together in one big pool and fix the problems that we have without going to running to the states?
And I think that's something that I also bring up a lot, is the idea of that's how the Afrikaners got out of poverty. They were in a pretty shit situation if you not too long ago. And that's exactly what you just said, is what the Afrikaners did, is that they created their own banks. They created their own little systems that made them basically, they didn't have to depend on anyone else. And then the question arises, why can't black South Africans do the same? I mean, Rania is the best example. They actually do a lot of outreach to other black communities and try and teach their ideology, not any race-based ideology, more their libertarian angle to their ideology, the idea of doing everything yourself, that the government doesn't have to do it for you.
The Black Consciousness movement had done a lot of work during apartheid towards that end. For example, Steve Biko started a clinic to serve, because as a way to serve the community was in, and a lot of businesses were started. Like if you go to people like Kemen Mashaba, Richard Maponya, they'll tell you that some of their motivation was the ideology of black consciousness, of being self-reliant, of doing things for yourselves. And then so the ANC sort of did away with all of that. If you look at what Andrea Jeffrey has written about the People's War and how the ANC made a special effort to destroy the IFP and also the black consciousness movement, and then you'll see that a lot of the work was starting to be undone by the ANC in the 1980s, and then going towards the first elections in 1994. And then after that, it just got into full swing after 1994. We were told that we need welfare, we were told that we need BEE, we were told that we need affirmative action, and it just downhill from there. But the elements of this type of the thinking that you advocate were germinating in the black community, and it was making a real difference until the ANC just basically did away with all of it.
And now, just from your own personal perspective, now I know anecdotes aren't really the best evidence, but just from your own personal perspective in the South African context, do you see a lot more people thinking like you? Do you see, as I coined it, the black anarchism almost taking root, and black South Africans realizing, but we don't need government to just provide everything for us. We can do it ourselves. Have you seen in your personal experience this idea germinate?
I think it's becoming more and more prevalent, but it's not yet widespread. It's still very much in its infancy, but something is growing, something is cooking, let's say. A lot of people are discovering the black consciousness side of Steve Biko as opposed to the socialist side of Steve Biko, and they're starting to ask these tough questions of themselves to become more self-reliant, starting their own community organizations. Just to tell you that in Newcastle, there are community organizations that work towards cleaning the town. That's all they do. And it's just people in townships who get together, they decide to clean their own environment. And yeah, so one of the arguments I've heard with them before was when they were trying to, they were trying to give the foreign-owned shops by Somalis and Ethiopians some grief. But then, like, you realize that, but apart from those things, but there is something germinating, something starting to rise. But like, it still needs to, it's still in its rough form right now. It's not yet in its final form where it can make a real difference in people's lives. And I think we need to help those people as much as possible achieve their self-reliance in a positive way.
Yeah. And that actually connects back to why I have you as a guest on my show today. Not only did I didn't know you wrote so many columns. I only today in my research session before the stream that I realized you've actually done some extensive column work for Rational Standard. But one of the reasons why I had you on is the idea of I want to give someone a platform that I can contribute to this idea that we can start spreading these ideas within South Africa, spreading the idea you don't need the state, you don't need to be coddled or treated like a child. You are an adult. I think you actually use that exact phrasing in one of your articles. You say people need to realize that they are adults.
Exactly.
They don't need to be treated like children. It should actually disgust them when they see how they're being paternalized or coddled.
Yes, and people who can make a lot of who can really push this idea forward is someone like the King of the Zulus. If he could just accept this idea of self-reliance, individual self-reliance, someone like that could do a lot to spread the ideology. So someone I would love to meet one day and just talk to him about these ideas, because he needs to realize that his subjects are suffering now under government. Under the many states brought about by the ANC, the current government. And so he needs to start realizing that they need to be self-reliant and use some of the land that he has in KZN, for example, to promote that self-reliance, giving people title deeds, helping them start farms and all of that, and just letting them be and allowing some of them to fail so that a lot more others can succeed.
Yeah. And that's a point I always make, and I'm actually disappointed to see that not a lot of people see this pattern developing. The idea of that the EFF is pushing of the state should own all the land, that's basically feudalism, where there's exactly just this lord that owns all the land, and then you have the people working the land, but they don't have a claim to that land. And I think that is a disastrous path for South Africa. And the only people that are going to suffer there is that the black South Africans are just going to re-enslave themselves. They're going to get to a point where they are just going to be indentured servitude to the government. They've just changed hands in terms of who their new oppressor is. And I think if we can get that idea out there, if even just one or two people can realize that from just listening to the stream, I think it's already a step in the right direction.
Yeah. Especially if you are black, I believe that there's so much that we can do. Like we have so much. Like, for example, just think that we have more than 60% youth unemployment in this country. Most of those are black people. There's so much potential there. If we could just get those people believing in themselves, trying to do stuff for themselves, starting their own businesses, and even if it's done on the basis that we are all black, we're helping each other as black people, I don't mind that. But it shouldn't be it shouldn't be a mediocre product. It shouldn't be buy for my business just because it's black, even though I'm producing an inferior service. It should be always we produce the best quality, we produce better quality than anyone else, and we support each other, not just because we are black and we produce high quality stuff, and that's what being black means, holding yourself to a higher standard than what even white people hold themselves to, or even Asian people or whoever else. We hold ourselves to a higher standard, we produce better products, we do better work. So that's what I would like. I think the people like the Afrikaner, we can learn a lot from them because I think they've had their Afrikaner consciousness moment, and we can take some of those lessons from them. But we can learn also from Steve Biko a lot, like take the ideology that Steve Biko put forward, take it forward, and just help ourselves, pull ourselves up by the bootstrap, as we will say.
And I think you touched on a very interesting point there, where Black South Africans can learn a lot from the Afrikaner. Because if you just look at the Afrikaner's past, we were oppressed by the British. I mean, we were thrown into concentration camps. An entire generation was wiped out because, and this is something I found very interesting, is if you read into the history, a lot of this was justified. The English justified the concentration camps through arguing that the Afrikaner is an inferior race as well. They viewed the Afrikaner as white Africans. They didn't view the Afrikaner as their equals or even as Europeans. They thought we were just a white tribe in Africa. So that then they could also oppress us in any way they want. And I think if you look at that, because that was one of the catalysts why, so there's this theory in psychology that abused children become abusers themselves.
Yes.
And I think that fueled a lot of what we saw with apartheid as well. The idea of, if you look at the Afrikaners' past, I mean, it would only be necessary, it would only be expected from a psychological perspective that a whole race or a whole group of people would be psychologically scarred and then act out on it. So I think if you can look at that from what the Afrikaner did to pull himself up on his bootstraps, I think that can be emulated by the other groups in South Africa as well. But we need to pass this point where you don't want to listen to someone or learn from someone because they're not from your group. I think we can all learn from each other.
Yes, I agree with you. And I would also say that the apartheid government actually nearly killed Afrikaner consciousness, if you could say, or Afrikaner self-reliance. And then it was only when we got democracy, we got rid of apartheid, then it would start coming back again, that spirit of self-reliance, of independence, of doing stuff for yourself. And so I think in some ways, even though you have stuff like BE and all of that, which is bad in terms of if you want a job as an Afrikaner, it's going to be harder to get a job from the States, and stuff like the Sasol share scheme, where it gave preferential access to its black employees. But at the same time, there's also been a good part of it is that it has promoted Afrikaner self-reliance, and that you see it through organizations like AfriForum and Sachdelikte.
That's a very interesting point you made there, where almost the death of apartheid only reignited the Afrikaners' independent nature, and I think reignited Afrikaner consciousness. I think that's a very interesting point, and I'll definitely contemplate it further post-show. Now, I see a question here from the chat, and I think it's a very interesting one. Burbul 1652 asks, how did you go from a socialist to a libertarian to an ANCAP? I think that's a very good question.
Right, it's a lot of it was, I was a socialist when I was still a student at UCT and at high school before that. And then what happened was after I became socialist, there was the 2008 and 2012 presidential campaigns in the USA where Ron Paul was running. That was my very first exposure to libertarian ideas. And at first I thought this guy is just speaking nonsense. This will never work. This is racist and all and whatever. But they were so compelling, and he seemed so sure that I did more research into it. I followed him. I looked at a lot of his speeches, the things that he had said before, and I realized that this actually could be the answer for South Africa. This idea that individuals can do things for themselves. Individuals can be can own property by themselves. You don't need the violence. You don't need force. You don't need to compel other people. And then there was also the economic aspects of it, getting introduced to Austrian economics to Ron Paul as well. And then you just realize that the problems that we've been facing can be fixed through individualism, and then being just trusting yourself enough to be a thinking and acting human being, a rational human being. And then when it comes to the anarchy part of it, it was just me realizing that how much self-reliance was lost when apartheid ended and government started giving handouts to people and started promising us houses and welfare and all of those things. And I realized that then the government is actually maybe even a negative thing. And then we just need to get rid of the government completely, because unless we do that, then someone will always want to bribe people in terms of, okay, we can do something that someone, like, we can do something for you. You can't really do this for yourself, because there'll always be people who are worse off. There'll always be people who have some bad luck in the economy, and so in order to prevent the possibility that someone is going to arise and just try and bribe people and just get rid of the entire government, because it's always going to be a force that wants to grow its own power at the expense of our liberties.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it in your article, Anarchism for the Future. Now, before I continue, just for everyone listening, there are links to all Mr. Dhlamini's articles in the description. If you want to go read them afterwards, I'd highly recommend it. Yeah. So you put in a quote here. Well, I'm quoting you where you wrote that what I didn't understand before, but now I do, because of a debate with Nicholas Wood Smith, who is the co-founder of Rational Standard. Yeah. Is that all libertarians are anarchists. Minarchists are people working to change the system into one where anarchy is possible. It's a dirty job, but someone has to do it. Yes. Anarcho-capitalists are the ones making the case for why living outside the government control is good for you as an individual. So yeah, that's a quote from one of your articles.
Yes, yes, yeah. So that's what I believe now, because I before I was a pretty strident anarchist. I was completely, I thought minarchists were collaborators and all of that, but now I've grown up a little bit. I realized that you do need, like, it's going to be hard to get into an anarchy without going through a minarchy first. So,
well, I'm a minarchist, so I'm the guy making the system work, so you can finally take over in the end.
Yeah, no. And the thing is, we don't want to take over; we just want to be left alone.
I think that's the majority of South Africans. I always say the average South African just wants to be left alone. The average South African wants to look after his family, wants to have a healthy life in terms of being able to interact with his friends, his family, and being able to have a job. But then the most important part is the average South African just wants to be left alone.
And you do that through freedom. Like, if you want to be prosperous, you should be free to sign contracts with anyone. If you want to, if you want to shut yourself off from the world and go spend your time with people who look like you or your own culture, you should be free to do that. No one should be able to force things on you, and that's what I think we need to gain wider acceptance in South Africa. And especially, I think I have this instinct, maybe because I'm biased, because I'm Zulu, but I have this instinct that these kind of ideas will find more fertile soil in Zululand among Zulus, because for me it seems like Zulu people they have a sort of a proto culture of self-reliance. They both get the idea that someone else can do something for them. So I think that maybe I can, something that I'm hoping to be able to do in future, is start to just spread these ideas and help strengthen those cultural aspects that are favor individual freedom and liberty.
And I think we're only now at the beginning of that phase where those ideas are taking root. Well, maybe if I'm being optimistic, we'll see it in our lifetime. But I think being more realistic, it's going to be something that takes a long while. I think to undo the thought patterns and the mindsets that have been ingrained into South African society is going to take at least one generation. It's not going to just be overnight.
So you know how in chess you win by capturing the king. I think we need to capture the king for libertarianism. I think he's the key to all of this, because for a couple of reasons, the Zulus are the biggest cultural or tribe in South Africa, for one thing, and and there's already a lot of those ideas like in their most rudimentary form in the culture. So if you could capture the king and convince him of these ideas, I think you would see a much quicker change. So that's why I would want to sit down with the king and just talk to him about these ideas, try and convince him.
I hope you're successful in that mission. I really like your metaphor of capturing the king. I do think, and I think it was someone here in the chat that said something similar. Yeah, it was Mr. Sideliner Opinions that said traditional leaders have immense influence and power. They should be used as a positive catalysts of change.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, and I think that's what a lot of foreigners don't understand, is they don't understand there's still the very old systems of governance that are still existent in the South African context. They don't know that traditional leaders are still existent in South Africa and wield a lot of influence and power. And that's it. Yeah.
if we can just convince them to stop their marriage to feudalism, the idea that they should be feudal lords, and then that will bring about greater prosperity, and they can be heroes for their own people, and they can be remembered well. Instead of being remembered only for their lifetimes, they can be remembered for eternity. If you are the guy who brought freedom, prosperity for your people, you'll be remembered forever. Who brought about the real life Wakanda in Zululand, you'll be remembered forever. So I think someone like Zwelithini should be at the forefront of pushing for these ideas, because it will make his subjects prosperous, and in return they will love him more.
And I think if you're looking at the alliance between King Zwelithini and AfriForum, I think that just shows he understands exactly what you were saying now. I think you are of the same mind. I think he understands the importance of property rights. He understands what EWC will do for South Africa. And he is willing to put tribal loyalties aside to work with an NGO that has his interests and his people's interests in mind.
Yes, and I hope after EWC is defeated, and then he can also think about maybe giving away all the Ngonyama trust and just leave himself a large estate. That's fine. Leave himself a large estate in KZN, and will even build him a nice house, but give most of it away to people so that they can have private property with title deeds, and they can start to become prosperous.
Yes, no, I completely agree, and I hope you're right. I hope that's where we're heading. Someone else in the chat says, I wish you well, Mr. Dhlamini. You make a huge contribution to South Africa's battle of ideas. No, thank you for that comment.
No, that's a very nice comment.
No, and I think that's exactly where it starts. It starts by just planting these ideas in people's minds. The idea of, I'm not going to force anything on anyone. I think I can't remember who said it, but there was a quote that goes, you're not going to bring about real societal change by forcing people to think a certain way. You're only going to bring societal change by making those people, helping those people come to those conclusions themselves. So you're not going to change South Africa by forcing people and saying free markets is the best system and you better agree with us. No, you're going to change society by telling them this idea is the best and here is why, and you can come to your own conclusion. If you don't agree with me, please challenge my ideas. Tell me where I'm wrong. But if you can't challenge my idea, then you have to admit that I'm right. You have to be the bigger man.
Yes. I agree with you, and I also think like right now I've come to the conclusion that our biggest enemies are universities. That's if you look at everything that we have to counter, every idea that we have to counter, it all came from universities. A lot of the good ideas also came from universities as well, but like all the bad ones also came from universities. So we also need to seriously think about privatizing all these things and just leaving it to the market, because I don't think a market will tolerate people calling for the abolishment of private property. Like it won't tolerate those retarded views. So we need to. So we need to just do away with public universities and have only private universities and get government out of setting the curriculums or anything like that.
And also something interesting I realized or noticed rather is the idea of a lot of the ideas that we're seeing in the public zeitgeist in South Africa, especially on university campuses, aren't even organic South African ideas. They're being imported from American campuses.
Yes. Yeah. That's true. That's true.
I always use when I see like black Marxists, I always use the joke of the irony when your mind has been colonized by an ideology that was thought up by an old white dude.
Yeah, so I remember just this week. Some people believe that woman, the term woman is oppressive, and then they spell it with an X instead of the A.
Yeah, the X. Yeah.
So, so I was talking to someone who's part of the Nguni tribes in South Africa, and they were using the same convention. And I asked them, "Do you also don't use Indodagazi? Indodagazi being the Zulu term for daughter, which has a root in Indoda, which means man. So why don't you change Indodagazi? Why do you only focus on women and need to change that?" But you, in your own language, you don't care whether these terms has a root in the same term for a man. So isn't that like isn't that showing that you are just colonized? Like you call for decolonization as well, but you're colonized yourself. because you think you've discovered an important principle, but you don't apply it to your own languages. You only apply it in the realm that the people from the West have told you to apply it in. So you're not actually thinking for yourself.
Yeah, it's actually, that's the irony, is that a lot of these people actually have to start off first by decolonizing their minds, because their minds
Yes.
are colonized by a foreign ideology and they don't even realize it.
They need the real black consciousness, not the thing that they've taken and bastardized. They need the real black consciousness. They need to be aware that they are just as powerful as any Western intellectual, that they can examine their ideas critically. They can think through it and figure out if it suits them. They don't have to accept everything that their professor or lecturer tells them.
Now we're approaching the end now of the stream, so I'd just like to firstly say thank you very much, Mr. Dhlamini, for coming on the show. It's been an excellent discussion. Aside from the little bit of technical difficulties we had halfway through, but I'm definitely going to just edit that out, and then we'll be pretty much right as rain. Yeah. I see in the chat, Ratatosk, lieve groete van Duitsland. Oh, thank you very much. And yeah, so I'd just like to take this opportunity to thank you again for being my guest on the show today. Thank you for everyone that tuned in. Please leave a like and a subscribe if you haven't yet. And yeah, so now I'm going to give you the opportunity to just, from what we've discussed today, just if you want to say anything that just a conclusionary remark, what message would you like to send out to the people listening today in terms of just from your mind?
Well, first of all, I would like to thank you for having me on and everyone who's listening. But as a concluding remark, I would like to say especially that we need to inculcate this culture of self-reliance. We need to be starting our own organizations as Black people, specifically solving our own problems, and just stop relying on the state so much, because it's filled with people who want nothing more than to control you. They don't want to help you, they want to control you. So rely on yourself, rely on your neighbors, and help each other.
Yeah, I think that's a perfect just conclusionary remark in terms of just to sum up the central point that we've touched on today. And my conclusionary remark would be, as I always tell you, don't just believe what I say, research what I say. And that's what I want to use this platform for. The idea of, I'm not just going to, even though I am a right-leaning individual, I'm not just going to have conservatives on. I don't believe in just creating an echo chamber, because then you never have your ideas challenged. I always use the metaphor of debate is like folding metal. So anyone that's familiar with smithing knows that if you fold metal, you actually make it stronger by putting it under stress. And I think that's how ideas work as well. If you don't debate with people that don't disagree with you, you don't talk to people that disagree with you, you're just going to become stagnant and your minds are going to become dull. I can't remember exactly where, but there's a verse in the Bible that goes, the same metals sharpen each other, something along those lines. And I do believe that completely. And I see there in the chat, Willem Petzer says, great stream, guys. Thank you very much, Willem. And yeah, and I see Yufa Kinleon says SA needs grassroots solutions. I couldn't agree more. And yeah, thank you again for everyone tuning in. Thank you to my guest for also taking time in your day to come have a chat with me. This has been I think the 11th episode of Stream of Consciousness. I'm pretty satisfied with it. The amount of audience keeps growing. And yeah, enjoy the rest of your weekend, guys. And I hope you have a good one.